"You don't belong here." Victor's hand pressed against my shoulder, stopping me from moving past the funeral home's ornate entryway. His voice was low but sharp, designed to cut without creating a scene. "The family section is reserved for actual family." I looked into the eyes of my stepson, eyes so similar to Malcolm's in color, but lacking all the warmth that had defined my husband. "Victor, please, I just want to say goodbye. You've had 8 years to say whatever you needed to say," he replied coldly. "The service is for those who've been part of his entire life, not just its final chapter." Behind him, Dominic and Amelia watched our exchange with varying degrees of discomfort, but made no move to intervene. They never did when Victor took the lead in excluding me. "Where would you like me to sit?" I asked, maintaining the dignity Malcolm had always admired in me, even as grief threatened to buckle my knees. Victor gestured toward the back of the chapel. "There should be space in the last row. If not, I'm sure standing won't kill you." I nodded once, straightened my black dress, the one Malcolm had helped me choose for a charity gala just 6 months earlier when we still believed he had years, not weeks, and walked past my stepchildren with my head high. The last row was indeed full, but an elderly woman I recognized as Malcolm's former assistant shifted to make room for me. "This isn't right," she whispered as I sat beside her. "Mr. Harrington would be furious." "Thank you, Margaret," I replied softly. "But today isn't about me." From the last row, I watched as Malcolm's children greeted mourners, accepting condolences with practiced grace. Their mother, Sylvia, sat prominently in the front row, dabbing occasionally at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Though divorced from Malcolm for 15 years, she had positioned herself as the grieving almost widow, a role the actual widow had been forcibly relegated from. The service proceeded with an elegance Malcolm would have appreciated, though the eulogies from his children painted a portrait of a man I barely recognized, all business acumen and financial success, with barely a mention of his kindness, his quiet philanthropy, his love of simple pleasures like Sunday morning coffee and crossword puzzles. When it ended, I remained seated as others filed out, waiting until I could approach the casket alone. Victor intercepted me before I could reach it. "The car is waiting to take him to the cemetery," he informed me with cold efficiency. "Family only for the burial. I'm sure you understand." I did understand, more than he knew. I understood that grief could manifest as cruelty. I understood that fear of loss could transform into desperate control. Most of all, I understood that Malcolm had anticipated this moment with painful clarity during our final private conversations. "Of course," I said simply. "Goodbye, Victor." As I walked alone to my car in the funeral home parking lot, I realized I'd never had the chance to touch Malcolm's casket, to place the small sprig of lavender, his favorite scent, that I carried in my purse. This final goodbye, like so many moments in our 8 years together, had been overshadowed by his children's determination to erase me from the narrative of his life. 1 week later, the text message I'd been expecting arrived from Mr. Goldstein, Malcolm's longtime attorney. "The reading of the will is scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. at my office. Malcolm was explicit that you should be present." I responded with simple acknowledgement, then spent the evening reviewing the notes from my final conversations with Malcolm. We had prepared for this, discussed every possibility, anticipated each reaction. Still, knowing what was coming did little to ease the heaviness in my heart. The next day, dressed in a conservative navy suit that reflected my former executive position rather than my role as grieving widow, I arrived at Goldstein's office 5 minutes before the appointed time. As I approached the ornate glass doors of the law firm, I saw them waiting, Victor, Dominic, and Amelia, a united front once again. "Well, well," Victor said, stepping forward to block my path. "If it isn't the gold digger, right on time to see what scraps might be thrown her way." I met his gaze steadily. "Hello, Victor. Mr. Goldstein is expecting me." "Let me save you the embarrassment," he continued, his siblings flanking him like lieutenants. "You're not in the will. Dad may have been fooled by your act while he was alive, but he wasn't stupid enough to leave you anything in death. Is that so?" I kept my voice neutral, giving nothing away. "We've already seen preliminary copies," Amelia added, her tone slightly less hostile but equally dismissive. "The estate is being divided among us, as it should be." Dominic, always the quietest of the three, simply watched me with calculating eyes. "So," Victor concluded with a smirk that twisted his handsome features, You can go back to your miserable little life and accept that it's over. Whatever scheme you had, it failed. Instead of arguing, I simply reached into my handbag and removed a sealed envelope with Mr. Goldstein's name written in Malcolm's distinctive handwriting. Would you please give this to Mr. Goldstein? He's expecting it. Victor took the envelope with obvious reluctance, as if touching something I had handled might contaminate him. What's this? A last-ditch attempt to stake a claim? Mr. Goldstein will explain everything, I said quietly. As if summoned by his name, the attorney appeared in the doorway. Ah, Mrs. Harrington, you've arrived. Please come in. We're ready to begin. She doesn't need to be here, Victor protested, still holding the envelope. This is a family matter. On the contrary, Mr. Goldstein replied with professional neutrality. Mrs. Harrington's presence was specifically requested by your father, and I see you have the envelope. Thank you for delivering it. Shall we proceed? I followed the attorney inside, aware of the confusion and suspicion radiating from the three siblings behind me. As we entered the conference room, Mr. Goldstein paused to open the envelope, scanning its contents quickly. His expression shifted subtly, surprise, then understanding, then something approaching admiration. He looked up at me with new respect. I see. Malcolm always did think several steps ahead. As we took our places around the polished conference table, I observed the confident expressions on the faces of Malcolm's children. They had no idea what was about to happen. The envelope I had delivered contained not a plea or a claim, but the final piece of a plan Malcolm and I had crafted together during his last months, a plan to protect his legacy from the very people who believed they were entitled to inherit it without condition. Mr. Goldstein cleared his throat and began the proceedings that would change everything. Before I read the will, I should inform you that the document I'm about to share supersedes any preliminary versions you may have seen. This is Malcolm Harrington's final testament, properly executed and legally binding. Victor's smug smile began to falter as he registered the attorney's words. The first tremors of panic were beginning to appear in his eyes, exactly as Malcolm had predicted they would. I folded my hands calmly in my lap, prepared for the storm that was about to break. The conference room fell into tense silence as Mr. Goldstein adjusted his reading glasses and opened the formal leather portfolio containing Malcolm's will. I kept my expression carefully neutral, though I knew exactly what was coming. Malcolm and I had spent many late nights discussing every detail, every potential reaction, every necessary safeguard. I, Malcolm Edward Harrington, being of sound mind and body, Mr. Goldstein began with the standard legal preamble, his voice steady and professional. Victor drummed his fingers impatiently on the polished mahogany table. We can skip the formalities, Harold. Just get to the distribution of assets. Mr. Goldstein peered over his glasses with the practiced tolerance of a man who had spent decades dealing with entitled heirs. As you wish, Victor. I'll skip ahead to the relevant sections. He flipped several pages forward and cleared his throat. Regarding the distribution of my estate, I hereby bequeath my assets as follows. To my wife, Donna Harrington, I leave 70% of my total estate, including but not limited to my primary residence, my investment portfolio, and controlling interest in Harrington properties. The words hung in the air for a moment before Victor erupted. What? He half rose from his chair, face flushing crimson. That's impossible. We saw the preliminary will. This has to be a forgery. Mr. Goldstein continued as if there had been no interruption. To each of my children, Victor, Dominic, and Amelia Harrington, I leave 10% of my estate to be administered by my wife Donna as trustee until such time as they demonstrate financial responsibility and personal growth satisfactory to the conditions outlined in Appendix B. Amelia's perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth. Administered. What does that mean? It means, Mr. Goldstein explained with practiced patience that while you each inherit 10% of your father's considerable estate, those assets will be managed by Donna as trustee. You'll receive regular disbursements, but major financial decisions regarding your inheritance require her approval. Dominic, always the most analytical of the three, leaned forward. On what grounds could our father possibly justify putting our inheritance under the control of a woman he knew for barely 8 years? In answer, Mr. Goldstein removed a sealed envelope from his portfolio. Your father anticipated that question, He left this letter to be read at this meeting. He broke the seal and unfolded several pages covered in Malcolm's bold handwriting. I had never seen this letter. Malcolm had written it privately, saying only that it contained his true feelings about his children and his wishes for their future. "My dear children," Mr. Goldstein read, "if you're hearing this letter, then you've just learned that your inheritance comes with conditions you didn't expect. I imagine you're angry, confused, and likely blaming Donna for somehow manipulating me into this decision. I want to be absolutely clear. This arrangement was entirely my idea, conceived after years of watching you approach money as an entitlement rather than a responsibility. Each of you has squandered opportunities I provided. Victor, your failed business ventures have cost me millions, yet you've learned nothing from these experiences except to ask for more. Dominic, your gambling has nearly destroyed you twice, with my money saving you from consequences that might have actually forced growth. Amelia, while you have genuine talent in design, you've repeatedly abandoned projects when they required real effort, expecting success without the work it demands. In contrast, Donna built her own successful career in financial management before we met. She understands both the privilege and responsibility that comes with wealth. Most importantly, she loves me for who I am, not what I can provide, something I've never been certain of with any of you since you became adults. This arrangement isn't punishment. It's my final attempt to help you become the people I know you can be. Donna has instructions to work with each of you, to mentor you in managing wealth responsibly. She has the financial expertise I respect and the personal integrity I trust completely. You have choices now. Fight this decision and potentially lose everything, or work with Donna and not only secure your inheritance, but perhaps gain something more valuable, the skills and wisdom to use it well. I leave you with this thought. A parent's greatest legacy isn't the wealth they leave behind, but the values they instill. I fear I've failed you in this regard, and this is my last chance to correct that failure. With enduring love and hope, your father, Malcolm Harrington. The silence that followed was absolute. Victor sat frozen, his earlier rage seemingly transformed to shock. Amelia stared at the table, tears forming in her eyes. Only Dominic watched me, his expression unreadable. Mr. Goldstein folded the letter and continued matter-of-factly. The will has been properly executed with witnesses who can attest to Malcolm's sound mind and free will. It includes affidavits from his doctors confirming his mental capacity. The document is, I assure you, legally unassailable. Victor found his voice first, though it trembled with barely controlled fury. This is your doing. He pointed at me accusingly. You manipulated a dying man, turned him against his own children. I met his gaze calmly. Your father and I discussed this arrangement extensively, Victor. He was of completely sound mind and deeply clear about his intentions. We'll contest it, he threatened, looking to Mr. Goldstein. We'll prove undue influence. The attorney shook his head slightly. I would strongly advise against that course of action. Malcolm anticipated this reaction and included a contest clause. Any attempt to legally challenge the will results in the immediate forfeiture of your inheritance entirely, with your portion being redirected to the Harrington Foundation. This is insane, Amelia whispered, looking up with mascara-streaked cheeks. Dad wouldn't do this to us. Your father did this for you, I corrected gently. He believed in your potential, even when your actions disappointed him. This was his way of giving you a structured opportunity to grow. Dominic, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke. What exactly does this trusteeship entail? What are the conditions for us to gain control of our inheritance? Mr. Goldstein referred to the document. The specific conditions are detailed in Appendix B, but broadly speaking, each heir must demonstrate financial responsibility, contribute meaningfully to the family business or another productive enterprise, and show personal growth as evaluated by the trustee, Mrs. Harrington, with input from a panel including myself and Dr. Susan Winters, your father's longtime friend and psychologist. So she controls everything, Victor spat. Our homes, our money, our futures, all subject to her approval? Not exactly, I interjected, speaking directly to them for the first time. Your father left each of you your current residences outright. You'll receive monthly allowances consistent with your current lifestyles. What's being managed are the major assets, the business holdings, investment portfolios, and commercial properties. I don't control your futures, Victor. I'm simply entrusted with safeguarding your father's legacy while you demonstrate you're ready to steward it responsibly. Amelia wiped her eyes, smearing her makeup further. And if we refuse to play this game, if we don't want to jump through hoops for your approval, then you'll continue to receive your allowances and retain your homes, I explained. But the larger inheritance will remain in trust, managed for the benefit of future generations of Harringtons. Your children would have the same opportunity to qualify for management of those assets when they come of age. The implications of this settled over them. The realization that their father had created a system that couldn't be circumvented by simply waiting me out or finding legal loopholes. Mr. Goldstein closed his portfolio. I suggest you all take time to process this information. Review the full documentation. Consult with your own legal advisors if you wish, though I caution again against any contest attempts. Mrs. Harrington has indicated she's willing to meet with each of you individually to discuss how to move forward constructively. Victor stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This isn't over, he said, glaring at me before storming out of the conference room. Amelia followed quickly behind him, avoiding eye contact entirely. Only Dominic remained, studying me with calculating intensity. You knew about this all along. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes, your father and I had no secrets from each other. And you're really prepared to take this on? Managing the entire Harrington empire while dealing with 3 people who hate you? I met his gaze steadily. Your father believed I could. More importantly, he believed it was necessary. For the business he built, and for the children he loved. Dominic nodded slowly, processing this. Without another word, he gathered his things and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Mr. Goldstein began organizing his papers. That went about as well as could be expected, he observed dryly. Malcolm predicted every reaction, I said, feeling a wave of grief wash over me now that the performance was complete. Victor's rage, Amelia's tears, Dominic's analytical assessment. He knew them so well, even as they disappointed him. And he knew you would handle it with grace, the attorney added, giving me a sympathetic look. The real work begins now, Donna. Are you truly ready for this? I thought of Malcolm's confidence in me, of our lengthy preparations, of the promise I had made as he slipped away from me in that hospital room. I'm ready, I said, with quiet determination. Not because I want control or power, but because I promised Malcolm I would try to finish what he couldn't. Helping his children become the people he always believed they could be. As I gathered my belongings to leave, I felt the weight of Malcolm's absence more acutely than at any moment since his death. This had been his final gift to me, not the wealth or status, but his ultimate trust and his final request to help the children who had rejected me become worthy of the legacy he had built. I straightened my shoulders and walked out of the conference room, prepared to honor that request, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. The days following the will reading unfolded exactly as Malcolm had predicted during our late-night strategy sessions. Victor, true to form, immediately consulted 3 separate attorneys seeking ways to contest the will. Each came back with the same conclusion. Malcolm had created an airtight legal document with multiple fail-safes against challenges. The contest clause meant that any formal legal action would result in Victor losing even the 10% he'd been guaranteed. Amelia retreated into wounded silence, ignoring my calls and texts offering to discuss her portion of the inheritance and how we might work together. According to Margaret, Malcolm's former assistant who had become my unexpected ally, Amelia had been seen having tearful lunches with her mother, Sylvia, no doubt plotting their next move. Only Dominic showed any pragmatism, requesting a meeting 3 days after the will reading. He arrived at Malcolm's, now my, home precisely on time, dressed for business in a tailored suit that reminded me painfully of his father. I've reviewed the conditions outlined in Appendix B, he said without preamble, as we sat in Malcolm's study. Some seem subjective. What exactly constitutes meaningful contribution or personal growth? I appreciated his direct approach. Your father was specific about the evaluation metrics. For meaningful contribution, he outlined quantifiable goals, either successful management of a division within Harrington Properties or demonstrated success in another enterprise that creates genuine value. And the personal growth requirement? Dominic pressed, his expression skeptical. Regular sessions with Dr. Winters, addressing the specific behavioral patterns your father identified as problematic, I explained. In your case, the gambling addiction that you've never formally acknowledged or treated. His face tightened. That's invasive and unnecessary. Nevertheless, it's a non-negotiable condition, I replied calmly. Your father watched you nearly destroy yourself twice. He wasn't willing to fund a third self-destruction. Dominic fell silent, studying the room, Malcolm's private sanctuary, now mine, with critical eyes. You've changed nothing in here. Not yet, I acknowledged. Some spaces need time before they're ready for transformation. He nodded almost imperceptibly, perhaps recognizing the metaphor. Victor's consulting lawyers about having you declared mentally incompetent as trustee. This didn't surprise me. Malcolm had predicted this exact move. On what grounds? He's suggesting that grief has impaired your judgment, that you're not qualified to manage an enterprise of this magnitude. I allowed myself a small smile. My 30-year career in financial management, culminating as CFO of Barrett Industries, suggests otherwise, as does the independent psychological evaluation your father arranged for me to complete just last month, anticipating this very accusation. Dominic's eyebrows rose slightly. He really did think of everything. Your father was a brilliant strategist, Dominic. Where did you think you got your analytical mind from? This unexpected compliment seemed to catch him off guard. He shifted in his chair, recalibrating. What exactly do you want from us? Really? The question hung in the air between us, the first genuine inquiry any of Malcolm's children had directed to me since his diagnosis. I want what your father wanted, I answered honestly. For each of you to become capable of handling wealth responsibly, to find purpose beyond consumption, to build rather than merely spend. And if we jump through these hoops, if we satisfy these conditions, then you gain control of your full inheritance with the business acumen to manage it successfully. I step back to an advisory role only. Dominic considered this, his expression thoughtful. And if we refuse, then you continue receiving your allowances, which are generous by any standard, while the bulk of the assets remain in trust, managed for future generations. Your children would have the same opportunity to qualify for management when they come of age. He nodded slowly, processing. May I see the current financial statements for Harrington Properties? If I'm going to consider taking a role there, I should understand its position. It was a reasonable request, and one I was prepared for. I retrieved a folder from Malcolm's desk, comprehensive financial reports I had prepared specifically for this meeting. The company is performing well overall, I explained, as he reviewed the documents. The Boston and Chicago portfolios are particularly strong. Miami is underperforming slightly, though that appears to be market-related rather than operational. Dominic's eyes moved methodically over the numbers, his expression gradually shifting from skeptical to impressed. These returns are better than what Dad reported last quarter. I've implemented some efficiency measures and renegotiated several vendor contracts, I said, not without pride. Malcolm had entrusted me with his life's work, and I had no intention of being merely a caretaker. You've been busy, Dominic observed, closing the folder. When did you have time to grieve? The question caught me off guard with its unexpected perceptiveness. I grieved while caring for your father during his final months, I answered softly. And I continue to grieve while honoring his wishes. The two aren't mutually exclusive. Dominic studied me with new consideration, as if seeing beyond the stereotype of father's second wife for the first time. I'll think about what you've said, about the conditions. That's all I ask, I replied. Your father believed in your potential, Dominic, despite everything. As he rose to leave, he hesitated at the door. You should know that Sylvia, our mother, is encouraging Victor's efforts to challenge the will. She believes she should have received a portion of the estate. Despite the generous divorce settlement and alimony she's received for 15 years, she believes she's entitled to more, he said with a hint of what might have been criticism. She always has. After he left, I sat in Malcolm's chair, running my fingers over the worn leather armrests that still held the impression of his hands. This first meeting with Dominic had gone better than expected, but it was just the beginning. Victor remained openly hostile, and Amelia was withdrawing further into her mother's influence. I'm trying, Malcolm, I whispered to the empty room, but they're fighting me at every turn, just as you said they would. I could almost hear his response. Stay the course, Donna. They need this more than they know. That evening I received an email from Victor's assistant confirming my worst fears. He had scheduled a competency hearing, attempting to have me removed as trustee on grounds of emotional instability and financial inexperience. The notification was coldly professional, but the intent was clear. All-out war. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Goldstein. "It's happening exactly as Malcolm predicted," I told him. "Time for phase 2. "Are you sure?" he asked cautiously. "Once we implement the contingency measures, there's no going back. The family divisions may become permanent." I thought of Malcolm's children, their entitlement, their resistance to growth, their refusal to see me as anything but an interloper. But I also remembered Malcolm's unwavering faith that beneath their flaws lay potential worth salvaging. "I'm sure," I said firmly. Malcolm knew this would be difficult. He also knew it was necessary. We proceed as planned. As I hung up, I steeled myself for the battle ahead. Malcolm had chosen me for this role, not despite the resistance I would face, but because of my ability to withstand it. I would not let him down, no matter how painful the process might become. The competency hearing was scheduled for Wednesday morning at the county courthouse, a rushed timeline that revealed Victor's desire to catch me unprepared. If that was his strategy, he had severely misjudged both me and his father's foresight. I arrived 15 minutes early, accompanied by Mr. Goldstein and Dr. Susan Winters, Malcolm's longtime friend and psychologist who had been instrumental in helping us prepare for this exact scenario. As we entered the courtroom, I spotted Victor and Amelia already seated at the plaintiff's table, accompanied by Bernard Walsh, a shark-like attorney known for aggressive tactics in high-profile inheritance disputes. Dominic was noticeably absent, a detail that didn't escape Mr. Goldstein's attention. "Interesting," he murmured as we took our seats. "Seems the Middle Harrington isn't joining this particular crusade." "Malcolm said Dominic would be the first to recognize futility," I replied quietly. "He's always been more pragmatic than emotional." Victor glanced over his shoulder, his expression darkening when he saw Dr. Winters beside me. The presence of Malcolm's trusted friend and psychological expert clearly hadn't been part of his calculated attack. Judge Rosemary Keller entered the courtroom, a stern-faced woman in her 60s with a reputation for cutting through emotional dramatics to focus on legal substance. After the formalities, she addressed Victor's attorney directly. "Mr. Walsh, you filed an emergency petition to remove Mrs. Harrington as trustee of the Harrington estate on grounds of emotional instability and financial inexperience. Given the expedited nature of this hearing, I assume you have compelling evidence ready to present." Walsh rose with practiced confidence. "We do, Your Honor. The respondent, Mrs. Donna Harrington, is clearly experiencing profound grief that has impaired her judgment, making her unfit to manage an estate valued at over $340 million. Furthermore, her limited business experience makes her fundamentally unqualified for such responsibility." Judge Keller's expression remained impassive. "And your evidence for these claims?" "We have observations from family members regarding Mrs. Harrington's emotional state," Walsh began, "as well as concerns from several business associates about her capability to manage Harrington properties." "Hearsay and opinion," Mr. Goldstein interjected. "Hardly the compelling evidence required for an emergency removal of a legally appointed trustee." The judge nodded. "I'm inclined to agree, Mr. Walsh. Do you have anything substantive to present?" Walsh seemed momentarily flustered, but recovered quickly. "Your Honor, we have documentation showing that Mrs. Harrington has already made significant changes to company operations without proper consultation with key stakeholders. This demonstrates both recklessness and inexperience." He presented several documents which the judge reviewed carefully before passing them to Mr. Goldstein. "These appear to be standard operational adjustments," the judge observed. "Vendor contract renegotiations, efficiency implementations, normal business operations, which resulted in a 4.3% increase in quarterly returns," Mr. Goldstein added, reviewing the papers. "Hardly evidence of mismanagement." Walsh shifted tactics. "Your Honor, there's also the matter of Mrs. Harrington's relationship with the deceased. She married Malcolm Harrington when he was already in his 70s, after a suspiciously brief courtship. The circumstances suggest opportunism rather than genuine affection." I felt a flash of anger at this attack on my marriage, but Dr. Winters placed a calming hand on my arm. "Counsel is veering into personal attacks that have no bearing on Mrs. Harrington's competency as trustee," Mr. Goldstein objected. "Sustained," Judge Keller agreed. "Mr. Walsh, please confine your arguments to relevant facts regarding the trustee's current capacity to fulfill her legal obligations." Walsh looked briefly to Victor, who was becoming visibly agitated by the proceedings' direction. Your Honor, we contend that Mrs. Harrington exerted undue influence over Malcolm Harrington during his final illness, manipulating him into this unusual arrangement that disadvantages his biological children in favor of his new wife. Judge Keller's expression hardened. That would be a matter for contesting the will itself, Mr. Walsh, not for an emergency competency hearing. Are you formally contesting the will? Because I should remind you of the contest clause that Mr. Harrington included. The courtroom fell silent as the implications settled. Any formal contest would trigger the clause that would disinherit Victor entirely. We are not contesting the will at this time, Walsh clarified hastily, merely questioning the current trustee's capacity to fulfill her duties. Then I suggest you provide actual evidence related to that specific claim, the judge replied firmly. Mr. Goldstein stood. Your Honor, if I may, we have prepared comprehensive evidence of Mrs. Harrington's qualifications and current capacity. First, her professional background. He presented my complete resume, highlighting my 30-year career in financial management, including my role as CFO of Barrett Industries, a company with annual revenues exceeding $500 million. Additionally, he continued, we have a psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Susan Winters just 3 weeks ago, confirming Mrs. Harrington's excellent mental health and cognitive function despite her recent bereavement. Dr. Winters submitted her formal evaluation, which Judge Keller reviewed with careful attention. Finally, Mr. Goldstein concluded, we have documentation showing that Malcolm Harrington himself arranged for an independent evaluation of Mrs. Harrington's financial competence by Deloitte Consulting, which found her exceptionally qualified to manage the Harrington estate. He presented the Deloitte report, which included a detailed assessment of my financial knowledge, management style, and strategic thinking. Mr. Harrington was nothing if not thorough, the judge observed dryly as she reviewed the materials. Victor leaned forward to whisper urgently to his attorney, his face flushed with frustration. Walsh looked increasingly uncomfortable as the case he thought would be straightforward unraveled before him. Judge Keller set down the documents and addressed the courtroom. Having reviewed the evidence presented, I find no basis whatsoever for removing Mrs. Harrington as trustee. The petition is denied. She looked directly at Victor. Mr. Harrington, I would caution you against further frivolous legal actions. The court takes a dim view of using its resources to pursue family vendettas. Victor stood abruptly. This isn't justice. She manipulated our father, and now she's manipulating the legal system. Mr. Harrington, the judge warned sharply, control yourself or I will hold you in contempt. Amelia tugged at her brother's sleeve, urging him to sit down, her expression mortified by his outburst. As the judge concluded the hearing, I remained seated, allowing the wave of relief to wash over me without visible display. Malcolm had prepared me for this moment, had ensured I had every resource needed to withstand the attack, but experiencing it firsthand had still been draining. Outside the courtroom, Victor brushed past me without a word, his face tight with barely controlled rage. Amelia followed, pausing briefly to meet my eyes with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, perhaps confusion, perhaps reassessment. Round 1 goes decisively to us, Mr. Goldstein observed as we walked toward the exit. But this is just the beginning, Donna. Victor won't give up easily. Malcolm said he'd make at least 3 major attempts before considering a different approach, I replied. This was the most obvious. The others will be more subtle, more creative. Dr. Winters nodded in agreement. Victor has always had difficulty accepting defeat. It triggers his deepest insecurities. As we reached the courthouse steps, I spotted Dominic waiting by a black sedan parked at the curb. He straightened as he saw me, his expression carefully neutral. I'd like a word, if you have a moment, he said, opening the car's rear door in invitation. I glanced at Mr. Goldstein, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I'll call you later, he said, understanding my silent question about whether this meeting was advisable. As I slid into the back seat, Dominic joined me, closing the door to create a private space for conversation. You were prepared for everything, he observed without preamble. Dad made sure of it. Yes, I answered simply. There was no point denying what was obvious. Victor won't stop, he continued. You humiliated him today. He'll only escalate. I studied Malcolm's middle child carefully, trying to discern his purpose. Why are you telling me this? Why weren't you in that courtroom supporting your siblings? Dominic was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on some middle distance. Because I've been reviewing the company financials, looking at Dad's management decisions over the past decade, reading the succession plans he created, and I'm starting to think he might have been right, Dominic admitted reluctantly. About all of it. About us not being ready. About needing guidance. It was the first crack in the unified front the Harrington children had presented, the first suggestion that Malcolm's plan might actually be working. I felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by caution. What exactly are you proposing, Dominic? He met my gaze directly. I want to meet the conditions. I want to learn, not to appease you or to gain control faster, but because I'm starting to see what Dad was trying to tell us. I nodded slowly, allowing myself to believe in the possibility of this first small victory. We can start tomorrow, 9 a.m. at the Harrington Properties main office. As I exited the car, Dominic called after me. He'll try to turn Amelia more firmly against you next. She's always been more emotionally vulnerable to manipulation. It was a warning, and perhaps the first genuine act of cooperation from any of Malcolm's children. Thank you, I said simply. Walking away from the courthouse, I felt Malcolm's presence more strongly than I had since his death, not as a ghost or supernatural force, but as the architect of this complex human chess game now in motion. The pieces were moving exactly as he had predicted. The battle wasn't won, far from it, but for the first time since the will reading, I could see a path forward that might actually fulfill Malcolm's final wish, the redemption of the children who had disappointed him so deeply, yet whom he had never stopped loving. 9 o'clock the following morning found me at Malcolm's, now my, desk in the executive suite of Harrington Properties. The office remained exactly as he had left it, from the precisely arranged fountain pens to the family photographs displayed with careful consideration. Unlike our home, where I'd preserved his spaces out of grief and sentiment, here I'd maintained things for strategic purposes. The continuity provided stability for employees while subtly reinforcing my position as Malcolm's chosen successor. Dominic arrived precisely on time, dressed in a charcoal suit that suggested he was taking this opportunity seriously. He paused at the threshold, his eyes scanning the unchanged office with an unreadable expression. "You look like him," I said quietly, standing there, assessing everything. He used to pause exactly like that. A flicker of something, pride, pain, crossed Dominic's face before he composed himself. "People always said I resembled him most. Not just physically," I clarified. "Your approach, your analytical mind. He saw himself in you more than in either of your siblings." Dominic absorbed this information silently before taking a seat across from me. "Where do we start?" I slid a leather portfolio across the desk. "With honesty, this contains a comprehensive assessment of Harrington Properties, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. It also includes an evaluation of your specific skills and knowledge gaps relative to what would be required for effective leadership." He opened the portfolio, scanning the contents with quick efficiency. "This is thorough." "Malcolm didn't believe in sugarcoating reality," I replied. "Neither do I." For the next hour, we reviewed the materials in detail. Dominic asked intelligent questions, took careful notes, and demonstrated genuine engagement with the information. The assessment identified his strengths in financial analysis and market strategy, while highlighting significant weaknesses in personnel management and operational details. "Your father believed these gaps could be addressed with proper mentoring and structured experience," I explained. "He created a development plan specifically for you." I presented the second folder, a detailed 18-month program that would rotate Dominic through key divisions of the company, pairing him with experienced executives who would provide hands-on training and regular evaluations. "And the other conditions?" Dominic asked, looking up from the documents. "The personal growth requirements? Weekly sessions with Dr. Winters, focusing specifically on your relationship with risk and your gambling addiction," I said directly. Malcolm was explicit about this being non-negotiable. Dominic's jaw tightened. "I don't have a gambling addiction. I've had some unfortunate losses, but—" "You've lost over $8 million in the past 5 years," I interrupted calmly. "Your father covered your debts twice to prevent criminal charges from loan sharks. You've attempted to stop 17 times by your own admission, yet returned to high-stakes games within weeks each time." He stared at me, clearly unsettled by the precision of my knowledge. "He told you everything." "We had no secrets from each other," I confirmed. Malcolm believed your analytical brilliance and your self-destructive gambling stemmed from the same source, a need for intense stimulation, for stakes high enough to make you feel something. He wanted you to learn healthier ways to channel that need. Dominic fell silent, his expression suggesting he was reassessing many assumptions about his father, about me, about himself. Your first session with Dr. Winters is scheduled for tomorrow at 4, I continued. Your orientation with the commercial development team begins Monday at 8. Do you accept these terms? After a long moment, he nodded. Yes. Then welcome to the first day of your apprenticeship, I said, extending my hand. Your father would be pleased. As we shook hands, an unexpected commotion in the outer office drew our attention. The door burst open to reveal Amelia, her eyes red-rimmed and her typically perfect appearance slightly disheveled. You traitor! She spat at Dominic, ignoring me completely. Victor just told me you're working with her now, after everything she's done. Dominic stood, his expression hardening. After everything she's done? Like what, specifically? Caring for Dad during his final months? Managing his business successfully? Being prepared for every baseless accusation Victor has thrown at her? Amelia seemed taken aback by her brother's defense. She manipulated Dad into changing his will. She's stolen our inheritance. Is that what Victor and Mother have been telling you? Dominic asked with surprising gentleness. Have you actually read the will yourself, Amelia? The detailed letter Dad wrote, explaining his decisions? She faltered. Victor summarized it. I'm sure he did, Dominic replied dryly. Sit down, Amelia. There are some things you need to understand. To my surprise, she complied, taking the chair beside her brother while continuing to avoid looking directly at me. Dad wasn't manipulated, Dominic explained, his tone measured. He was disappointed. In all of us. The structure he created is his attempt to help us become better than we've been. I've spent the past week reviewing everything, and as much as I hate to admit it, he was right. We're not ready to manage his legacy responsibly. Amelia's eyes finally flickered to me, then back to her brother. So you're just giving up? Accepting her control over everything? I'm accepting an opportunity to learn, he corrected. To prove I can be what Dad believed I could be. With the right guidance. You could do the same. By submitting to her conditions? Amelia asked incredulously. By letting her dictate my life? I decided it was time to speak. The conditions aren't mine, Amelia. They're your father's, and they're specifically tailored to each of you, focusing on your unique strengths and challenges. What do you know about my strengths? She scoffed, finally addressing me directly. I know you have remarkable talent as a designer that you've never fully developed because you've been too afraid of failure, I replied calmly. I know you left RISD 6 months before graduation because a professor criticized your thesis project. I know you've started and abandoned 4 different design ventures in the past 8 years, each time when the work became challenging. Her face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. You don't know anything about me. Your father knew you, I countered gently. He believed in your creative vision. He also recognized your pattern of abandoning pursuits when they required sustained effort through difficulties. I reached into my desk and withdrew a third portfolio, the one Malcolm and I had prepared for Amelia, though I'd held little hope of using it this soon. This contains the development plan your father created specifically for you, I explained, placing it on the desk within her reach. It includes funding and mentorship for you to complete your degree, followed by a role redesigning key Harrington properties to showcase your talents. The personal growth component involves working with Dr. Winters on your fear of failure and your tendency to abandon projects when they become difficult. Amelia stared at the portfolio without touching it, visibly conflicted. You don't have to decide today, I said, recognizing her need for space to process. Unlike Victor, you haven't taken hostile action that requires immediate response. You have time to consider your options. Victor says you're going to sell off Dad's properties, she said, her voice smaller than before, that you're already meeting with potential buyers. I shook my head. Another lie. I've canceled 3 separate meetings Victor had arranged with developers interested in parceling out Harrington Holdings. Your father built this company to last generations, not to be dismantled for quick profit. This information clearly surprised her. She glanced at Dominic, who nodded confirmation. It's true. I've seen the records, he said. Victor was exploring selling off parts of the portfolio well before Dad died. She stopped it. Amelia's carefully constructed narrative was visibly crumbling. She reached hesitantly for the portfolio, opening it to scan the contents. Her eyes widened as she saw the detailed plans her father had created, plans that took her design aspirations more seriously than her family ever had. "He really thought I could do this?" she asked softly, looking at a section outlining a potential showcase project reimagining the Harrington Building lobby. "He believed in you completely," I confirmed. "He just recognized that, like most people, you need structure and support to achieve your potential." She closed the portfolio, clutching it against her chest as she stood. "I need time to think." "Take all the time you need," I replied. "My door is always open." After she left, Dominic exhaled heavily. "That was unexpected." "Your sister has always been more thoughtful than she appears," I observed. "She's just been overshadowed by Victor's dominance and your intellect. Do you think she'll accept the conditions?" I considered the question carefully. "I think she's more tempted than she expected to be. Your support made a difference. She trusts your judgment more than mine." Dominic nodded slowly. "One down, one considering, one to go. Victor will be the real challenge." "Your father said Victor would never come around until he hit rock bottom," I admitted. "He predicted we might have to let that happen naturally." "Victor doesn't believe in rock bottom," Dominic said grimly. "He believes in fighting until he gets what he wants, regardless of cost." As if summoned by our discussion, my phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Goldstein. "Victor just filed new action. Financial malfeasance claim. Serious allegations. Call immediately." I showed the message to Dominic, who closed his eyes briefly in frustration. "And so it begins again. What will you do?" "Exactly what your father prepared me to do," I replied, reaching for the phone. "Meet each attack with calm evidence, never lowering myself to his level, while keeping the door open for reconciliation when he's finally ready." As I dialed Mr. Goldstein's number, I caught Dominic watching me with newfound respect. Perhaps Malcolm had been right after all. This painful process might eventually heal his fractured family, though the path would be far more difficult than any of us had imagined. Victor's new attack came in the form of a formal complaint filed with the state's Financial Regulatory Board, alleging mismanagement of trust assets, self-dealing, and failure to provide proper accounting to beneficiaries. The allegations were meticulous in their construction, just plausible enough to require formal investigation, yet fundamentally baseless, as Mr. Goldstein quickly assured me. "It's a nuisance filing," he explained during our emergency meeting that afternoon, "designed to trigger an automatic review process that will temporarily restrict certain trustee powers while the investigation proceeds." "Which powers specifically?" I asked, maintaining the calm demeanor Malcolm had always admired. "Primarily the ability to make major investment decisions or significant property transactions without court approval," Mr. Goldstein replied. "Victor's likely hoping this will hamstring your ability to manage the trust effectively, creating ammunition for further legal challenges. He doesn't realize we anticipated this exact move," I observed, opening my laptop to access a secure folder Malcolm and I had prepared. "Strategy Document 7, I believe." Mr. Goldstein smiled slightly as I pulled up the relevant file. "Malcolm's categorical approach to contingency planning continues to impress me, even beyond the grave." The document contained our predetermined response to regulatory challenges, complete with pre-drafted financial disclosures, transparency measures that exceeded legal requirements, and a communication strategy for addressing the allegations publicly. "We'll need to accelerate the quarterly trust review," I noted, scanning the document, "and prepare for the regulatory interview next week." "Already scheduled," Mr. Goldstein confirmed. "But there's something else you should know. Victor has hired Patricia Westmoreland," the name registered immediately, "a notorious crisis management specialist known for aggressive media campaigns that often tried cases in the court of public opinion before they reached actual courtrooms. So we should expect a publicity offensive," I concluded. "Almost certainly. Westmoreland's standard approach is to control the narrative through strategic leaks and carefully place stories that paint her client as the victim of injustice." "Malcolm prepared for this too," I said, pulling up another document, though he hoped it wouldn't be necessary. The file contained a comprehensive media strategy, including pre-written statements addressing potential allegations and, most critically, a detailed dossier of Victor's business failures, financial mismanagement, and personal indiscretions that could be released if absolutely necessary. "This is quite thorough," Mr. Goldstein observed as he reviewed the material, "though using it would certainly burn any bridges with Victor permanently. Which is why it's our last resort," I agreed. Malcolm wanted to leave room for reconciliation, if possible. This would make that nearly impossible. After Mr. Goldstein departed, I sat alone in Malcolm's home office, surrounded by the careful preparations we had made together during his final months. The leather-bound planner on his desk still contained notes in his increasingly shaky handwriting, strategic calculations, psychological insights about his children, contingency plans for every scenario he could anticipate. You knew exactly how they would react, I murmured to his empty chair. Every move, every countermove. What Malcolm couldn't have anticipated was how wearing this constant conflict would become, the emotional toll of being vilified by the children of the man I had loved so deeply, the exhaustion of always being on guard against the next attack. My phone rang, interrupting these thoughts. Surprisingly, the caller ID displayed Amelia's name. "Have you seen it?" she asked without preamble when I answered. "Victor's regulatory complaint?" "Yes, I've been briefed." "No," she replied, her voice uncharacteristically tense. "The article in the Boston Business Journal. It just posted online." I quickly opened my tablet and found the publication's website. The headline made my stomach tighten. Harrington Family War, Widow's Power, Grab Threatens Legacy Empire. The article was a masterpiece of innuendo and selective fact presentation, technically accurate in specific details while painting a completely distorted overall picture. It described me as a former financial executive who had rapidly ascended to control of the Harrington fortune after a brief marriage to the ailing patriarch. Victor was quoted extensively, positioning himself as the devoted son fighting to protect his father's legacy from exploitation. "This is just the beginning," Amelia warned. "Victor showed me Westmoreland's media strategy. There are planned stories in at least 5 more publications, each worse than this one. He's going scorched earth, Donna." Her use of my first name, a first since Malcolm's death, registered even through my shock at the article's contents. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked carefully. A pause. "Because it's wrong," she finally said. "I've been reading Dad's letter, the real one, not Victor's summarized version. I've reviewed the development plan you showed me. Whatever I think about the will structure, this public character assassination isn't right. It was the first moral stand any of Malcolm's children had taken on my behalf, a small crack in the unified front against me." "Thank you for the warning," I said, genuinely moved by her unexpected integrity. "Victor doesn't know I'm calling you," she added. "He thinks I'm still completely on his side." "And are you?" I asked directly. Another pause. "I'm reconsidering my position. Dominic seems to think Dad's plan has merit, and I'm starting to see why. This was progress beyond what I had dared hope for so soon. Would you consider meeting officially to discuss your development plan? No commitments, just a conversation." "Yes," she replied after brief hesitation, "but not at the office. Somewhere private." We arranged to meet the following afternoon at a quiet cafe away from the financial district where we were unlikely to be recognized. After ending the call, I immediately phoned Mr. Goldstein to update him on both the media attack and Amelia's unexpected outreach. "This changes our approach," he observed. "With Amelia potentially breaking ranks, Victor loses significant leverage. The narrative of children united against a manipulative stepmother falls apart. We need to respond to the article without escalating the public conflict," I said, thinking through the implications. "Something measured that addresses the mischaracterizations without creating more drama." "Agreed. I'll draft a statement focusing on the legal facts and Malcolm's documented intentions. In the meantime, this development with Amelia is promising." After hanging up, I returned to the Business Journal article, reading it more carefully now that the initial shock had passed. Between the lines of Victor's accusations, I could detect the hand of a master manipulator, Patricia Westmoreland's calculated approach to shaping public opinion. The article specifically emphasized my outsider status, my brief marriage to Malcolm, conveniently omitting that 8 years is hardly a fleeting relationship, and my supposed lack of connection to the Harrington legacy. What it failed to mention was my 30-year career in financial management, Malcolm's meticulously documented wishes, or the extensive legal protections he had put in place to ensure his intentions were honored. My phone rang again, Dominic this time. "I assume you've seen the hit piece," he said when I answered. "Yes, and I've heard from Amelia about what else is coming. She called you?" Surprise colored his voice. "That's unexpected. Victor thinks she's firmly in his camp." People can surprise you, I replied, especially when given space to think for themselves. Victor's making a mistake with this media campaign, Dominic observed. It's too aggressive, too public. The regulatory complaint had at least a veneer of legitimate concern. This is just character assassination. Your father predicted Victor would eventually overplay his hand, I said. He believed that when backed into a corner, Victor always chooses escalation over strategic retreat. Dad knew us well, Dominic acknowledged, with a hint of rueful admiration. Sometimes better than we know ourselves. After we disconnected, I stood at the window of Malcolm's study, my study now, looking out over the carefully maintained gardens that had given him such pleasure in his final years. The estate that Victor was so desperate to control had never been about wealth or status for Malcolm. It represented something he had built from nothing, a legacy of creation rather than consumption. The irony wasn't lost on me, that the very qualities Malcolm had hoped to instill in his children through his carefully structured will were the same qualities Victor was demonstrating he lacked through his increasingly desperate attacks. The wisdom to know what battles were worth fighting, the patience to build rather than destroy, the integrity to seek truth rather than convenient narratives. As the evening shadows lengthened across the garden, I made a decision. It was time to implement another aspect of Malcolm's plan, one we had hoped wouldn't be necessary, but which now seemed unavoidable given Victor's escalation. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had memorized but never used. Mr. Sullivan? This is Donna Harrington. I believe my husband Malcolm discussed a possible situation with you before his passing. Yes, that's correct. It appears we've reached that point. Could we meet tomorrow morning? Thomas Sullivan had been Malcolm's most trusted investigator during his business career, a former FBI agent who specialized in corporate malfeasance and financial crimes. Malcolm had retained him specifically for this contingency, though we had both hoped Victor's attacks would never require such a dramatic countermeasure. As I hung up, I felt a profound sadness that things had reached this point, balanced against my determination to honor Malcolm's wishes. His children deserved the chance to grow into their potential, but that opportunity couldn't come at the expense of the legacy he had entrusted to my care. Victor had chosen escalation. Now he would learn that his father had anticipated and prepared for this exact scenario, with consequences he couldn't possibly have foreseen. Thomas Sullivan arrived at precisely 8 the next morning, his appearance exactly as Malcolm had described, impeccably dressed in a conservative suit that somehow managed to suggest both government service and private sector discretion. At 65, his silver hair and weathered face projected trustworthiness, while his alert eyes missed nothing as he surveyed Malcolm's study. Mrs. Harrington, he greeted me with a firm handshake. Malcolm spoke highly of you during our preparations. He said you possessed, and I quote, grace under pressure that would impress a combat veteran. Malcolm had a gift for overstatement, I replied with a small smile, gesturing toward the sitting area. But I appreciate the sentiment. Please, have a seat. Sullivan placed his leather briefcase on the coffee table between us. Malcolm briefed me thoroughly on the potential scenarios that might necessitate my involvement. Based on our conversation yesterday, I understand we're dealing with Scenario C, aggressive public attacks coupled with regulatory challenges. Correct, I confirmed. Victor has escalated beyond what we hoped, hiring Patricia Westmoreland for a media campaign designed to undermine my credibility and legitimacy as trustee. Sullivan nodded grimly. I'm familiar with Westmoreland's tactics. Create enough smoke to suggest fire, control the narrative through strategic media placements, apply public pressure to force concessions. Precisely. The first article appeared yesterday in the Boston Business Journal. According to Amelia, at least 5 more are planned, each progressively more damaging. Sullivan opened his briefcase and removed a slim folder. Then it's time to implement the countermeasures Malcolm authorized. He was quite specific about the sequence and timing. He handed me the folder, which contained a detailed investigative report on Victor's business activities over the past 5 years. As I reviewed the contents, my stomach tightened with dismay. Is this verified? I asked, looking up from a particularly troubling section, detailing misappropriation of funds from a joint venture. Triple verified with documentation, Sullivan confirmed. Malcolm had me investigate thoroughly but discreetly after the Rivera Group investment raised red flags. Everything in that report would stand up in court. The scope of Victor's financial misconduct was breathtaking, misrepresentation to investors, misappropriation of partnership funds, tax irregularities, and even a carefully concealed gambling problem that rivaled Dominic's in scale, if not in nature. While Dominic sought the adrenaline rush of high-stakes games, Victor had been making increasingly risky business bets with other people's money. Malcolm knew all this? I asked, struggling to reconcile the detailed evidence before me with the fact that my husband had never fully shared the extent of Victor's transgressions. He knew, Sullivan confirmed. It broke his heart, but he needed to understand exactly what he was dealing with. This report was completed 3 months before his death. Why didn't he confront Victor directly? Sullivan's expression softened slightly. He was dying, Mrs. Harrington. He chose to focus his remaining energy on creating a structure that might eventually help Victor, rather than engaging in a confrontation that would likely only entrench his self-destructive behaviors. I nodded slowly, recognizing Malcolm's strategic thinking. The long game he played even as his own time grew short. What does he want me to do with this information? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Malcolm was explicit about the sequence, Sullivan explained. First, a private meeting with Victor, offering one final opportunity to cease hostilities and engage constructively with the development plan. If rejected, a meeting with all 3 children where the findings are disclosed, giving Victor a chance to acknowledge his actions to his siblings before they become more widely known. Only if both these approaches fail does the information go to regulatory authorities and, as a last resort, to the media as a counter to Westmoreland's campaign. The graduated approach was quintessential Malcolm, measured, strategic, allowing multiple opportunities for course correction before irreversible consequences. Even now, he was trying to save his son from himself. I'll need to meet with Victor immediately, I decided, before the next planned media piece appears. Sullivan checked his watch. I've taken the liberty of arranging that possibility. Victor is currently at the Downtown Athletic Club for his regular Thursday morning racquetball session. He typically finishes around 9:30 and has coffee in the members' lounge. I could have a car waiting for you. I raised an eyebrow at this level of detailed surveillance. Malcolm authorized ongoing monitoring? Only of basic patterns and public movements, Sullivan assured me. Nothing invasive. Just enough to facilitate necessary interactions when time might be of the essence. 45 minutes later, I was seated in a quiet corner of the Downtown Athletic Club's members' lounge, watching Victor enter in his post-workout attire. He froze momentarily upon seeing me, then composed himself and approached my table with calculated casualness. Following me now? He asked, his tone suggesting amusement masking irritation. Merely taking advantage of predictable patterns, I replied evenly. We need to talk, Victor. Privately and urgently. I have nothing to say to you that my attorneys can't communicate more effectively, he replied, signaling to a waiter for coffee. I placed Sullivan's folder on the table between us. This conversation happens here privately, or it happens in front of your siblings, or it happens in front of regulatory authorities. Those are the options Malcolm outlined. The mention of his father's name in this context caught Victor's attention. His eyes narrowed as he studied the unmarked folder. What is this supposed to be? Everything, I said simply. The Rivera Group misappropriations, the Westlake development tax schemes, the undisclosed Cayman accounts, the gambling debts covered through partner funds. Victor's carefully maintained composure slipped momentarily, a flash of genuine alarm crossing his features before he recovered. Creative fiction won't help you, Donna. Whatever you think you have is documented, verified, and actionable, I finished for him. Your father had it all investigated before he died, Victor. He knew everything. This revelation, that Malcolm had known the full extent of his misconduct, seemed to hit Victor harder than the threat of exposure itself. He sank slowly into the chair opposite me, the confident facade crumbling. Why? He asked finally. Why would he investigate me like a common criminal? Because he loved you, I answered truthfully. Because he wanted to understand the full scope of the problem before creating a solution. The trust structure, the development plan, the conditions, they weren't punishment, Victor. They were his attempt to help you correct course before it was too late. Victor stared at the folder, not touching it, but unable to look away. And now you're using it to blackmail me. No, I corrected firmly. I'm offering you exactly what Malcolm wanted you to have. A choice. End the media campaign. Dismiss the regulatory complaint, engage with the development plan he created specifically for you, or face the consequences of your actions being revealed, first to your siblings, then to authorities if necessary. You're bluffing, he said, but without conviction. You wouldn't risk the Harrington name being dragged through that kind of scandal. Malcolm was explicit about his priorities, I replied. The long-term integrity of his legacy outweighs short-term reputation concerns. He believed that sometimes healing requires lancing the wound, however painful the process might be. Victor's expression hardened, but I could see calculation behind his eyes, the rapid assessment of options, risks, and potential outcomes that had made him simultaneously successful and dangerous in business contexts. I need time to consider my position, he said finally. You have until 5 o'clock tomorrow, I informed him, standing to leave. After that, I meet with Dominic and Amelia to share this information, as Malcolm directed. As I walked away, leaving the folder deliberately on the table, I heard Victor call after me. He really prepared for everything, didn't he? Even this, I turned back briefly. Your father understood you better than you ever gave him credit for, Victor. He prepared for this conversation because he knew it might be your last chance to choose growth over destruction. Leaving the athletic club, I felt none of the satisfaction Victor might have imagined. There was only sadness for the broken relationship between father and son that had led to this moment, and cautious hope that perhaps, faced with the full consequences of his actions, Victor might finally begin the difficult journey toward becoming the man Malcolm had always believed he could be. By 4:55 the following afternoon, I had prepared Malcolm's study for what promised to be one of the most difficult family meetings of the entire ordeal. Dominic had arrived 15 minutes early, his expression grave after I briefed him on the general nature of the information about to be shared. Amelia arrived moments later, clearly confused about the urgent summons, but complying nonetheless. The only question was whether Victor would appear or force my hand regarding the disclosure of his financial misdeeds. At precisely 5 o'clock, as I was preparing to begin without him, Victor entered the study. His appearance was impeccable as always, but the shadows under his eyes suggested a sleepless night spent wrestling with the decision before him. Thank you all for coming, I began, once everyone was seated. Victor and I had a conversation yesterday that necessitates this family meeting. Victor raised his hand slightly, interrupting. Before you continue, I have something to say. His voice carried none of its usual aggressive confidence. I've withdrawn the regulatory complaint filed against Donna as trustee. I've also terminated Patricia Westmoreland's services and canceled the planned media campaign. This announcement clearly surprised both his siblings. Dominic's eyebrows rose slightly, while Amelia looked between her brother and me with evident confusion. What's going on? She asked. Yesterday you were telling me we needed to fight harder. What changed? Victor met my eyes briefly, a silent question passing between us. I nodded slightly, giving him the space to frame the situation in his own words. Dad knew things about my business dealings that I thought were private, he said carefully. Donna has access to that information now. She's offered me a choice: engage with Dad's development plan or face the consequences of that information becoming public. You're agreeing to the conditions because of blackmail? Amelia asked incredulously. It's not blackmail, Victor corrected with surprising candor. It's accountability. There's a difference. Dominic studied his brother with newfound assessment. These business dealings, are they serious? Victor's laugh held no humor. Serious enough that if made public, I'd likely face not just civil penalties, but criminal charges. Dad had it all investigated before he died. Every shortcut, every misrepresentation, every creative accounting solution. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Amelia looked stricken, while Dominic's expression suggested he was rapidly reevaluating many past interactions. Did you know about this? Amelia asked Dominic accusingly. Is that why you switched sides so quickly? I knew nothing about Victor's business issues, Dominic replied evenly. I agreed to Dad's conditions because I realized he was right about my own problems. The gambling, the risk addiction. I needed the structure he created. I decided it was time to refocus the conversation. Malcolm's goal was never public exposure or punishment, I explained. Even now, the details of Victor's actions remain private. What matters is the choice he's making now. Which is what exactly? Amelia pressed. Victor straightened slightly, a flash of his old confidence returning, though tempered with something new, perhaps humility. I'm agreeing to Dad's development plan, all of it. The financial oversight, the business ethics training, the therapy sessions, the structured return to management responsibilities. The comprehensive nature of Malcolm's plan for Victor finally became clear to his siblings. Far from being merely punitive, it was a carefully designed rehabilitation program addressing the specific character flaws and behavioral patterns that had led to his misconduct. "So all three of us are just surrendering?" Amelia asked, looking between her brothers with bewilderment. "Not surrendering," Dominic corrected. "Growing up, finally." Victor nodded slowly in agreement, perhaps the first time the eldest Harrington had ever acknowledged his middle sibling's perspective as valid. "And you?" Amelia turned to me. "You get everything you wanted, control of the empire, all of us jumping through hoops for your approval." I met her gaze directly. "What I wanted was to honor Malcolm's wishes, Amelia. Nothing more, nothing less. The control is temporary and conditional. The hoops, as you call them, are opportunities your father created because he believed in your potential, even when your actions disappointed him deeply. And if we all satisfy these conditions," she pressed, "if we complete these development plans to your satisfaction, then you each gain management control of your full inheritance, as Malcolm intended." I replied simply. "I step back to an advisory role only. The temporary structure becomes permanent independence, earned rather than simply granted." Something in my tone must have finally penetrated Amelia's defensive wall. She studied me with new consideration, perhaps seeing beyond the stepmother label for the first time. "You really loved him, didn't you?" she asked quietly. "This isn't about power or money for you." "I loved him completely," I confirmed, allowing my carefully maintained composure to soften slightly. "And he loved all of you. Even when your actions broke his heart, everything he created, the conditions, the development plans, even the contingency measures Victor has now experienced, came from that love. Tough love, perhaps, but genuine nonetheless." Victor cleared his throat. "When do I start with the program?" "Monday morning," I replied. 9 a.m. with the Ethics Review Committee, 2 p.m. with Dr. Winters for your initial psychological assessment." He nodded, accepting these terms without the resistance that would have been unimaginable just days earlier. "And the information about my business activities remains sealed unless you abandon the development plan," I said. Malcolm was very clear about this. The goal is growth, not punishment. As the meeting concluded, an unexpected shift had occurred in the family dynamic. The united front against me had completely dissolved, replaced by a tentative new alignment. 3 adult children finally beginning to accept their father's last attempt to guide their development, and a stepmother they had resented now cautiously viewed as the executor of his wishes rather than an enemy to be defeated. Dominic lingered after his siblings departed, helping himself to a glass of the scotch Malcolm had always kept in the study. "You could have led with Victor's misconduct," he observed, swirling the amber liquid thoughtfully. "Exposed him immediately, broken the opposition from the beginning." "That wasn't Malcolm's way," I replied, declining the offered drink. "He believed in giving people chances to make better choices before forcing their hand." "Calculated compassion," Dominic mused. "Strategic mercy." "He played the long game, even when his own time was growing short," I agreed. "He believed that meaningful change had to come from within, not just from external pressure." Dominic considered this, then raised his glass slightly. "To Dad, then, still teaching us lessons from beyond the grave." As I watched Malcolm's middle child, the one who most resembled him in both appearance and analytical thinking, I felt a profound sense that we had finally turned a corner. Not toward instant harmony or artificial reconciliation, but toward something potentially more valuable: authentic growth and grudging respect. Victor would struggle with the humbling requirements of his development plan. Amelia would likely continue vacillating between resistance and cooperation as she processed her complicated feelings. Dominic would face his own demons through the addiction recovery process. None of it would be easy or straightforward. But for the first time since Malcolm's death, I could see a path forward that might actually fulfill his final wish: the transformation of his children into the people he had always believed they could become, if given the right structure, guidance, and consequences. As evening settled over the Harrington estate, I allowed myself a moment of quiet connection with Malcolm's memory. "The pieces are moving exactly as you predicted," I whispered to the empty room. "I just hope the endgame is what you envisioned." 3 months after the pivotal family meeting, subtle but significant changes had begun manifesting throughout the Harrington family dynamic. The most visible transformation was in the family business, where all 3 siblings now maintained regular presences in various capacities. Victor in legal compliance, Dominic in financial strategy, and Amelia in design and renovation of key properties. The weekly progress reports from department heads, therapists, and mentors created a comprehensive picture of their individual journeys, each distinct in nature but collectively moving in a positive direction, albeit at different speeds. Dominic had embraced his development plan most completely, attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings religiously, while demonstrating natural aptitude for the financial strategy role Malcolm had envisioned for him. His analytical mind, once channeled into high-risk gambling, now found healthier expression in complex business modeling and investment strategies for Harrington properties. "He's thriving," Dr. Winters observed during our monthly review meeting. "The structured environment provides the intellectual stimulation he craves without the self-destructive risk-taking." Malcolm predicted this transition quite accurately. Amelia's progress had been more erratic, but nonetheless encouraging. After initially approaching her design role with skepticism, she had found unexpected validation in seeing her concepts implemented in the renovation of the Harrington building lobby, her first completed project and one that had garnered positive coverage in architectural publications. "The recognition has been transformative for her self-confidence," Dr. Winters noted. "For perhaps the first time, she's experiencing the satisfaction of completing something difficult rather than abandoning it when challenges arose." Victor's journey proved most complex, as Malcolm had anticipated. The eldest Harrington chafed against the oversight and structured rehabilitation program, his progress marked by periods of sincere engagement followed by resentful backsliding. Yet even he showed signs of genuine growth, particularly after completing the ethics retraining program. "He's developing awareness of the patterns that led to his misconduct," his program mentor reported. "The recognition is uncomfortable for him, but essential for lasting change." On a personal level, my relationships with Malcolm's children had evolved from open hostility to cautious functional cooperation. Dominic had become almost collegial during our weekly strategy meetings. Amelia occasionally sought my input on design challenges, though always framing these interactions in strictly professional terms. Even Victor maintained civil discourse during required sessions, his former aggression replaced by reserved formality. None of this constituted the warm family bonds Malcolm might have ultimately hoped for, but it represented significant progress from where we had begun. Progress I documented carefully in the journal I maintained to track the implementation of his final wishes. That morning, as I reviewed the latest reports in preparation for quarterly trust evaluations, Mr. Goldstein called with unexpected news. "Sylvia has filed for a portion of Malcolm's estate," he informed me without preamble. "She's claiming that provisions in their divorce agreement entitle her to ongoing support beyond the substantial settlement and alimony she already received." I sighed, unsurprised, yet disappointed. Malcolm had predicted his ex-wife might eventually make such a claim, particularly if she observed her children beginning to cooperate with the trust structure. "What's her legal standing?" I asked, already anticipating the answer. "Virtually non-existent," Mr. Goldstein confirmed. The divorce agreement was comprehensive and final, with no provisions for posthumous claims. Malcolm ensured that her settlement was more than generous, specifically to prevent future claims. "Yet, she's proceeding anyway," I observed. "Indeed, she's retained Martin Dixon, an aggressive litigator known for dragging out proceedings to force settlements regardless of legal merit." "I assume Malcolm prepared for this contingency as well," I asked, reaching for the contingency binder we had compiled together. "Page 42, Section 3, Mr. Goldstein confirmed, with a hint of admiration. "Malcolm categorized this as a predictable nuisance scenario rather than a serious threat." I found the relevant section, which outlined our response strategy. Immediate but minimal legal defense, no settlement offers regardless of delay tactics, and, most importantly, complete transparency with the Harrington children regarding their mother's actions. Malcolm was explicit about that last requirement, Mr. Goldstein noted. He believed they needed to see this behavior pattern clearly, without cushioning or interpretation. "I'll speak with them today," I agreed. "Together, I think. This affects all 3 equally." That afternoon found the Harrington siblings assembled in the company's main conference room, their expressions reflecting varying degrees of curiosity and concern about the unexpected meeting. "Thank you for coming on short notice," I began, distributing folders containing the legal filings. "I've asked you here because a situation has arisen that affects all of you, and your father was explicit about my responsibility to address it transparently." Victor reviewed the documents first, his legal training allowing him to quickly grasp their significance. His expression darkened as he passed the folder to Dominic. "Mother is suing for a portion of Dad's estate," he summarized for Amelia, who was still scanning the dense legal language, "claiming she's entitled to ongoing support despite the divorce settlement." "Can she do that?" Amelia asked, looking between her brothers with confusion. "I thought everything was finalized years ago." "Legally, her position is untenable," I explained, "but she can certainly create delays, expenses, and public attention through prolonged litigation." "Looking for a nuisance settlement," Dominic observed, his analytical mind immediately identifying the strategy. "File baseless claims, create enough hassle that paying her to go away becomes the expedient option." "Precisely," I confirmed. "Your father anticipated this possibility and left specific instructions regarding our response." "Which is?" Victor asked, his tone neutral but attentive. "Absolute refusal to settle regardless of delays or public relations considerations," I replied. Malcolm believed that giving in to such tactics would only encourage repetition. The siblings exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them that I couldn't fully interpret. "You seem unsurprised," I observed carefully. Dominic sighed, setting down the documents. "Mother has a pattern of viewing Dad's resources as an unlimited entitlement. The divorce settlement was extraordinarily generous. Multiple properties, investment accounts, significant monthly alimony, yet she's repeatedly complained it wasn't enough. She called it her compensation for wasted years," Amelia added quietly, "as if their marriage had been nothing but a business arrangement gone wrong." Victor, whose relationship with Sylvia had always seemed strongest, remained uncharacteristically silent. When he finally spoke, his words carried unexpected weight. "She told me last week that she was exploring options regarding Dad's estate," he admitted. "I advised against it, but she dismissed my concerns, said I was becoming just like him," apparently not a compliment in her view. This revelation, that Victor had prior knowledge of Sylvia's intentions yet hadn't aligned with her strategy, marked a significant shift in his positioning. 3 months earlier, he would likely have coordinated with his mother against me. Now he at least recognized the inappropriate nature of her claims. "How would you like to proceed?" I asked, deliberately including them in the decision process rather than simply implementing Malcolm's instructions unilaterally. Another silent exchange passed between the siblings before Dominic spoke for the group. "We support Dad's directive. No settlement, regardless of delays or tactics." Victor nodded in agreement. "Mother's claim has no legal merit. She shouldn't be rewarded for filing it. And we don't want to be dragged into taking sides publicly," Amelia added. "We've had enough family business in the headlines." Their unified response, the first time all three had aligned on any significant matter since Malcolm's death, suggested progress beyond what quarterly reports could capture. They were demonstrating independent judgment rather than reactive positioning, prioritizing principles over personalities. "Thank you for your clarity," I said, genuinely impressed by their maturity in this moment. "I'll instruct Mr. Goldstein to proceed accordingly." As the meeting concluded and they prepared to return to their respective responsibilities, Victor lingered behind. "There's something else you should know," he said once his siblings had departed. "Mother asked me for information about the trust structure and your role as trustee. She was fishing for vulnerabilities, ways to challenge your authority." I studied Malcolm's eldest son carefully, noting the conflict evident in his expression. "And what did you tell her?" "That the arrangement was legally sound and that challenging it would be counterproductive," he replied, meeting my gaze directly. "I didn't tell her about my situation or the development plans. I said only that Dad had created a structure that served multiple purposes, including protecting his legacy from exactly this kind of claim." This deliberate distancing from his mother's tactics represented perhaps the most significant evidence yet of Victor's growth. He was choosing integrity over alliance, principles over expedience. "Thank you for telling me," I said simply, recognizing the difficulty such a choice must have presented for him. Victor nodded once before turning to leave, pausing at the door with uncharacteristic hesitation. "She won't stop with this filing. Persistence has always been her most consistent quality." "Your father knew that," I assured him. He prepared accordingly. As I watched Malcolm's eldest son walk away, his posture straighter, his step more purposeful than the defensive swagger he had maintained in earlier months, I felt a surge of hope that perhaps Malcolm's final vision for his family might actually be realized, not through coercion, but through the authentic growth he had always believed possible. 1 year to the day after Malcolm's death, I stood alone in the small private chapel adjoining the Harrington family plot, arranging white roses, his favorite, in preparation for the memorial service. The quiet space provided a moment of reflection before the family and close associates would gather to mark this solemn anniversary. So much had changed in a single year. The trust structure that had initially created such conflict had gradually transformed into a framework for genuine growth and development. The quarterly evaluations now documented measurable progress rather than resistance, with all 3 Harrington children meeting or exceeding the benchmarks Malcolm had established. Victor had successfully completed the business ethics program and was now leading a compliance division he had created within Harrington Properties, an ironic but fitting role that utilized his legal expertise while reinforcing the principles he had previously circumvented. His personal therapy continued, addressing the deep-seated insecurities that had driven his most destructive behaviors. Dominic had maintained his sobriety from gambling for 9 consecutive months, channeling his analytical brilliance into legitimate business strategy. Under his guidance, Harrington Properties had expanded into 2 new markets with calculated risk that balanced growth with stability. Exactly the approach Malcolm had hoped to see from his middle child. Amelia had perhaps shown the most dramatic transformation. After the success of her first completed project, she had pursued increasingly ambitious design initiatives throughout the Harrington portfolio, eventually establishing a dedicated design division within the company. She had also returned to complete her degree, addressing the abandoned education that had been one of Malcolm's greatest disappointments. As for Sylvia's legal challenge, it had proceeded exactly as Malcolm predicted, aggressive in tactics but fundamentally lacking in merit. The court had recently dismissed her claims with prejudice, preventing future attempts along similar lines. Her defeat had been comprehensive but private, as Malcolm had wanted, consequence without unnecessary humiliation. The sound of footsteps interrupted my reflections. I turned to find all 3 Harrington children entering the chapel together, an unexpected sight that momentarily caught me off guard. "We thought you might be here early," Dominic explained. "We wanted a moment before the others arrive." I nodded, stepping back from the altar to give them space with their father's memory. To my surprise, Victor approached with a small wooden box I instantly recognized. Malcolm's cherished humidor, crafted from Brazilian rosewood and inlaid with his initials. "We found this in Dad's study closet last week," Victor explained, placing it carefully on the altar beside the flowers. "It contains letters he wrote to each of us, dated 2 weeks before he died, with instructions that they be read on the first anniversary of his passing." "He never mentioned those," I said softly, genuinely surprised. Even with all our careful planning, Malcolm had maintained some private communications, final thoughts for his children that were theirs alone. "We thought you should know about them," Amelia added, her tone warmer than any she had used with me previously. "They help explain some things." Victor opened the humidor, revealing 3 sealed envelopes and unexpectedly a 4th with my name written in Malcolm's distinctive handwriting. "This one's for you," he said, handing me the unexpected letter. "We didn't know it existed until we opened the box." I accepted the envelope with trembling fingers, recognizing the weight of this moment, a final message from my husband that I had never anticipated. "Would you like privacy?" Dominic asked, unusually perceptive of the emotional significance. "No," I decided after a moment. "We should read them together, as a family." The word family hung in the air between us, a term I had never before applied to our collective relationship. Yet somehow, in this quiet chapel a year after Malcolm's death, it didn't feel entirely misplaced. Each of us took our respective letters and found separate pews, creating space for private reading while remaining connected in the shared experience. I carefully opened Malcolm's final message to me. "My dearest Donna, if you're reading this, a year has passed since I left you with the tremendous burden of implementing my final wishes. Knowing you as I do, you've carried this responsibility with the same grace, integrity, and quiet strength that made me fall in love with you. You've likely faced resistance beyond even what we anticipated, My children can be formidable opponents when they feel threatened, a quality I recognize from my own younger self. The hardest lesson I ever learned was that sometimes those we love most require the greatest challenges to reach their potential. I hope by now you're seeing some evidence that my plan is working, that beneath their entitlement and anger, the people I always believed my children could become are emerging. If not, continue holding the course. Real growth rarely follows our preferred timeline. What I haven't told you, couldn't bring myself to say even as we made our careful plans, is how deeply I regret needing to place this burden on you. You deserve joy and peace in your life after me, not conflict and difficulty. That you accepted this responsibility despite knowing what it would entail only confirmed what I already knew. You are the most remarkable person I have ever known. Today, as my children read their own letters, they're learning something I should have told them much earlier: how instrumental you were in creating the development plans designed to help them, how you advocated for their potential even when their behavior toward you was inexcusable, how you saw their best selves when they were showing you their worst. Whatever relationship now exists between you and my children, know this: you have honored my wishes with more dedication than I had any right to expect. If they haven't yet recognized the gift of your guidance, that failure is theirs, not yours. All my love, for all time, Malcolm. I folded the letter carefully, wiping away tears that had formed unbidden. Across the chapel, I could see Malcolm's children similarly moved by their father's final words. Victor sat with his head bowed, letter clutched tightly in his hands. Dominic stared upward at the chapel's simple stained glass window, blinking rapidly. Amelia made no attempt to hide her tears, reading through them as they fell onto the paper. After several minutes of shared silence, Victor spoke first. He told me he was proud of me, he said, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable, despite everything, and that you had been the one to insist my development plan include a path back to leadership, not just compliance. Dominic nodded. My letter says something similar, that when he wanted to simply cut off my access to funds entirely, you argued for structured rehabilitation instead, that you believed in my potential even when he was at his most discouraged. Amelia looked up from her letter, eyes red but clear. He told me you were the one who identified my design talent as something genuine rather than just another abandoned hobby, that the renovation opportunities were your idea. I hadn't expected Malcolm to share these details, the private conversations where I had indeed advocated for approaches that offered redemption rather than mere punishment, growth rather than simple consequence. Your father loved you deeply, I said simply, even when your actions disappointed him most profoundly. All I did was help him create structures that reflected that love in practical terms. But we treated you terribly, Amelia acknowledged, voicing what none of them had directly addressed before. Excluded you from the funeral, fought the will, accused you of manipulation and worse. And yet here we are, I observed quietly, all moving forward in directions Malcolm hoped to see. That's what matters in the end. Victor cleared his throat. The quarterly evaluations are approaching. Based on the metrics Dad established, all three of us have now met the conditions for assuming management of our full inheritances. This was technically true, a milestone reached more quickly than either Malcolm or I had anticipated. The development plans had initially projected 18 to 24 months for completion, yet here we were at the 1-year mark with all measurable conditions satisfied. Are you going to sign off on the transition? Dominic asked directly, his analytical mind going straight to the practical implication. I considered the question carefully, aware of its significance. This was the moment when I could either honor the letter of Malcolm's plan by acknowledging their completed conditions or extend my control by finding reasons to delay transition. Yes, I said finally. I'll authorize the transfer of management authority as Malcolm intended. You've each met the conditions he established. The transition should be completed within 30 days. The relief in their expressions was evident, though tempered with something I hadn't expected: uncertainty. And your role going forward? Victor asked. Dad's plan specified an advisory position. If that's something you'd find valuable, I replied carefully. The decision is yours now. The three siblings exchanged glances, another of those silent communications that had become increasingly common as they rebuilt their relationships with each other. We'd like you to remain involved, Dominic said, apparently speaking for all of them. Your financial expertise has been invaluable to the company's growth this past year, and I could use your input on the London renovation, Amelia added. If you're willing. Victor nodded his agreement. We've learned enough to know how much more we still have to learn. Your guidance would be appreciated. As the chapel door opened and other mourners began arriving for the memorial service, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not of Malcolm's entire vision, perhaps, but of the essential framework he had created. His children had grown beyond what they had been, accepting responsibility rather than merely expecting privilege. The legacy he valued most, not wealth but character, had found root in the next generation. Later, as I placed flowers on Malcolm's grave while a gentle rain began falling, I whispered to him one last time, "They're going to be all right, my love. Different from what you imagined, perhaps, but stronger than they were. Your final gift to them is taking hold." The raindrops mingled with my tears as I said goodbye, not to Malcolm, whose presence I would always carry with me, but to the weight of responsibility I had carried this past year. The trust had served its purpose. The children had found their way, and I had kept my final promise to the man who had loved them enough to challenge them even from beyond the grave. As I turned to leave, I found the 3 Harrington siblings waiting respectfully at a distance, united not against me now, but in shared remembrance of their father. When they approached to place their own tributes on Malcolm's grave, I stepped aside to give them space, but Victor surprised me by gently taking my elbow. "Stay," he said simply. "You belong here too." In that moment, standing together in the rain as a family shaped by conflict but moving toward healing, I felt Malcolm's presence more strongly than at any time since his death. Not as a ghost or supernatural force, but as the architect of this unlikely reconciliation. His final amendment had succeeded beyond anything we could have anticipated. The legacy he truly valued was secure at last.